bed until half an hour ago when my printer stopped working and I couldn't find all the stuff.
Okay, I could read a short passage from Devon Smith. That's the first thing that first page I opened, and it's a nice short chapter.
Yeah, cool. Love it.
About 2 or 3 minutes.
Perfect. You're right. I do have a lot of questions, so it's probably good to keep it short.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. No, they're great list of questions. So.
Oh, thanks. All right, we're live. Well, hello, anyone who's joined us here today. It's lovely to have you here. I hope you can settle in and be comfortable. We'll be starting in around 10 minutes or so. If you've got any questions, you can feel free to type them underneath there and we'll be able to get the questions and I'll be able to pass them on to Dave for you. While I'm waiting to set up, obviously, welcome and thank you for coming to this Shot in the Dark with David Whish-Wilson, talking about his book, Shore Leave today. A little bit about myself. My name's Fiona Hardy. I'm a writer and I write the crime book column for the Readings Monthly newsletter. And if you'd like to tell us where you're from or, you know, who you are today, feel free to let us know that as well. We'll just be kind of chatting amongst ourselves for the next few minutes as well until we get to 8 o'clock and then we can get started properly. So yeah, settle in, you know, peruse your book if you've got it. It's a good one.
Excellent.
It really is. I'm going to use a little bit of time to this Dave Warner quote on the back of the book. I really love it so much. I'm just going to read it again. It's such a great little summary. Murder and mayhem, Navy and Nazis, bullion and bikers. Whish-Wilson delivers a docker's breakfast of crime cooked to perfection on the hot bonnet that is Perth 1989. Cruising through it all, the incomparable detective Frank Swann. It's just a really good summary. I think he did a really good job on that one.
It's a very Dave Warner quote. I like it. I saw him as a stand-up comedian back in it must have been the 80s, and same kind of voice, I think.
I remember him doing a performance at the Ned Kelly Awards, like 2-3 years ago. That was a great time too. Just barreled it out. Everyone was pumping. It was a good time.
That's right. That's what he won it with. So that would have been in Melbourne.
Yeah. The Toffing Town, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good place for the Neddies there, I think.
Yeah, it was, who knows where they're going to be. So it was entirely online this year, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens next year as well. For those listening in, Dave Whish-Wilson is part of the Ned Kelly Awards, Australian Crime Writers Association, the kind of think tank behind the awards. So, and I was part of that as well at the time, and kind of very tiny part of it right now still.
Still our countersigner. You know?
It's true. I get emails from Dave all the time telling me to help out. It's like, hey, I can do this. It's good to stay on board, and there's just too many great, you know, Australian crime writers around that I really want to, you know, it's too exciting. It's hard to avoid. There's too many great books.
Yeah, and it's looking like another great year next year too for the awards. A lot of new releases.
Yeah, I'm just turning this volume up, so excuse me if my giant arm suddenly appears in the way. There we go. Now I can hear a little bit better.
So can you hear? Because I was talking in my usual quiet voice. So can you hear all right now? Or?
Yeah. If anybody else has any like technical problems or any questions like that as well, feel free so far to pop that in underneath. You can let us know anything and we can pass that on or try and fix it up or anything like that as well. Just another 5 minutes and then we'll get started on the book as well.
Okay.
Or on the discussion, I should say. I've got some questions. I'm not going to read the whole book in the next hour, but I've got some questions and hopefully you guys will have some questions as well. And Fremantle Press threw in a couple of interesting curly questions as well that I'm going to pass on to Dave and see how he goes with those.
Well, not too curly, I hope.
I was recently in a radio interview surprised by a question, so I've tried to make sure that the very hard ones, Dave kind of had a little bit of an inkling of what I was going to say, so he wasn't completely silent online like I had to be for a moment while I was trying to remember what I'd been asked and how I could fix it. So yeah.
It's tough when that happens. That moment of silence feels like 5 minutes, but it
really does.
Probably just a couple of seconds.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yep. Live radio. Have your kids ever intervened in a live radio?
I have always made sure that I'm online, and when my partner is around, to make sure. I've only got one kid and he just keeps her far away, though her bedroom wall is like right on the other side of this, so I'm pretty sure she just listens into everything and can't sleep until I stop talking. I think that's what we're all doing at the moment with all of our online meetings and so on, trying to work around a interesting environment to try and make it all happen properly.
That's right. Our youngest, who's now 12, when he was about maybe 2, I had a live radio call with the radio station in Adelaide, and I went into the bedroom and shut the door, and of course that was like a red flag. Like, what's he doing in there? And I just started talking, and I just heard this banging on the door, bang, 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 and because our door lock was broken, he started pushing. So I was leaning back, and then he came in, and it was all okay. It was quite funny. We just integrated it as part of the interview.
I think we all have to say, we're doing this for live, and that something's going to happen. We just can't help it. Our cat often tries to break into this room here, so if you hear banging on the door here, it's probably my cat, and then she'll come in and make some, loud, demanding noises, and then stalk out again. So we'll see how that goes. Might get a visit.
Likewise, if a dog walks past our front gate, you'll hear our dog leap to the defense of the house.
Oh, it's very noble of your dog.
Yeah, it's very noble and very loud too. Unfortunately.
It's what they do. Sorry, I'm just making sure I sort out all of my notes here. So we're going to get started pretty soon, I think.
What's your cat's name?
Kipo. We actually know being from Melbourne, we've been in lockdown for the past couple of months. And we've been filling in a lot of time watching TV. I have to say Netflix has been a saving grace. If this had happened 10 years ago, I don't know what we would have done with our time. But there's this pretty great kids show called Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts she's like a 13-year-old girl who basically saves the world and unites monsters and humans. And we just kind of really got into that. And then we got a cat during lockdown. We'd been planning it anyway, but it coincided happily with us, needing somebody else in the house to occupy our time. And so we thought, sure, we'll call her Kipo too. So it's been a really nice addition to have a pet in our family, because my daughter's an only child, and I think on her own, without someone else in the family to mix things up, probably would have been a little bit frustrating, I think, in the middle, lots of lockdown.
I didn't think of that, but it's probably been a nice time for pets because their human buddies are around most of the time. They're going to get a shock when things go back to.
She's already been quite surprised now that my daughter's gone back to school and my partner's gone back to work, and all of a sudden it's just me and her in the house. I think she's finding it a little bit relaxing to not be quite so loved hard all day long, but I think she's slightly missing it as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're at 8 o'clock now, so I reckon we might kind of get started. I'll do another big hello. So welcome to everybody else who's come in. This is a Fremantle Press Shot in the Dark episode with David Whish-Wilson, talking about his new book, an amazing book, the fourth Frank Swann book. So yeah, my name's Fiona Hardy. I am one of the managers at Readings in Carlton. I also write the crime column for their monthly newsletter as well. And yes, I'm a writer and I'm from Melbourne as well. And so Readings Bookstore has been around since about 1969. We've got 7 stores all around Melbourne as well, but all of them have been shut over the past 3 months due to the pandemic. We have been reopened for 1 whole week, apart from one of our stores at the State Library, which was still pending. We're seeing when the State Library reopens, hopefully we'll be able to reopen then too. The Readings Foundation is what we donate 10% of the Readings profits to as well. And last year we donated over $135,000 to grants and in grants, to literacy charities around Australia. So yeah, it's pretty good. I really love being part of Australia's amazing community-minded book-selling industry. That's something, I really like, and it kind of feeds into things like this as well. So yeah, now being able to do amazing things like this, talk to David Whish-Wilson. And David, of course, here he is on screen. I've just knocked out my headphones. I flailed too hard with excitement. I'm sorry. I'm going to keep myself together a bit more. So David Whish-Wilson is a writer. He's written numerous fiction books and also some creative non-fiction books as well. His first Frank Swann book, Line of Sight, published by Penguin, was shortlisted for a Ned Kelly Award as well in 2012. He's also written Zero at the Bone and Old Scores and Shore Leave, his new book, amongst others. David lives in Fremantle with his partner and 3 kids, and he's also a professor at Curtin University. Before I get started with you though, I'd just like to remind everyone to stick around until the end, and then David can tell everyone who the winner is of his 2 lies, 1 truth, 2 truths, 1 lie.
Yeah, I think I did it wrong. So 3 truths and 1 lie.
3 truths and 1 lie video.
I slipped an extra one in there.
Sneaky. But in the meantime, Dave, would you like to tell us a little bit about Shore Leave?
Yeah, so Shore Leave, as you say, is the fourth novel in the Frank Swann crime series. The first one was Line of Sight, which was set in 1975 around a royal commission. It was based on the murder of a real-life Perth identity, the brothel madam Shirley Finn. So I was using fiction to kind of tell a true story about Perth. And then there was Zero at the Burn, 1979, Old Scores set in the mid-1980s around the WA Inc. period, a time of, so I kind of started on a street level and worked my way up to broad-scale political corruption, I guess you could say. And Shore Leave finds my character, Frank Swann, in the very late 1980s. He's a bit battered and bruised after his experiences in Old Scores, in Old Scores, and he's sticking pretty close to home in Fremantle. He also has a wife and 3 kids and a dog called Maya, same name as my dog, which I slipped in to keep the kids happy. They've been asking for it for a while. Yeah, so he's trying to live a quiet life. He's minding his own business. He's only taking the odd kind of job. And then, the USS aircraft carrier Carl Vinson rocks up into town, and Swan is contacted by the Master of Arms of the Shore Patrol, Steve Webb, and his job is to track down AWOL sailors. He comes to Swan and asks him to help track down a sailor. Should be a pretty easy job, but of course, things don't go to plan.
They never do. So just a reminder as well that you are welcome to buy a copy of Shore Leave if you don't have one already. There'll be a link in the event page to send you to the readings website so that you can buy a copy there if you would like. And maybe, Dave, you'd like to give a bit of a sample of said book, perhaps, before we get started.
A quick read. Okay, so like all of the other Swan novels, I'll just put my specs on. Like all of the other Swan novels, I've written this story from the perspective of 3 different characters. One is an old lag in Fremantle jail who's in the very final months of a 20-year sentence, and he escapes, Tony Pascoe. And the other is a USS midshipman, shit kicker / dishwasher who has started off working in the scullery and has never been promoted anywhere else. His name is Devon Smith. So this is a little very short chapter from Devon Smith's point of view. Devon Smith wiped his hands on his US Navy coveralls and closed the lid on the industrial dishwasher, waiting to hear the churn of water. The damn thing wasn't working properly. He and Marcus had pre-washed the thousands of dishes by hand before putting them in the machine. Devon had earlier emptied the clogged drain, then crawled beneath the bench top to check the plumbing, while Marcus, who was a black 6-footer, looked on with folded arms. Marcus was like that. You'd ask him to do something hard and dirty and he'd puff his lips and shake his head. He wasn't lazy, but he also wasn't going to get his hands dirty before some white man had given it a try. Devon Smith and Marcus were the same rank of kitchen patrol shit kicker. There was nothing Devon could do about Marcus because their supervisor, Lenny Arnold, was also black. Devon knew that they played cards together on the rear deck after their shifts, whereas outside of work hours, Devon and Marcus lived entirely separate lives. US Navy was supposed to be a family where the only colour that mattered was the uniform, but that wasn't how it went down. Racial politics on board the USS Carl Vinson were no different than back in the US, which was all right by Devon Smith. Devon looked to the clock and saw that it was 16:40. Because of the delay, fresh dishes wouldn't be ready for the dinner service unless they both hauled ass, but he needn't have worried. Marcus and Lenny began to pick up the hand-washed dishes and give them a cursory wipe with a tea towel before loading them onto the trolleys destined for the mess. Smith took a towel and went to work alongside them. It was near 100 degrees in the kitchen, and the months of sweat and heavy lifting since the Carl Vinson began its tour meant that his arms were corded with muscle. The day out from port in a white country, and Devon wanted to look his best. The only thing he knew about Australia came from the film Crocodile Dundee and the excited stories of his fellow seamen from their tour a couple of years ago. Summer whites were being pressed and shoes polished. Plans were being hatched around the best places to get laid. Like every unmarried man on the aircraft carrier, Smith was looking to get his nut, but that wasn't all. A man needed a plan, his father had taught him, and he and his father had devised a strategy that would potentially see him rich enough to quit the service. This fact made it easier to stomach working alongside Lenny and Marcus, who as usual were talking too loud and barely laughing at things that weren't even funny. you probably twigged there that Devon Smith has some neo-Nazi sympathies there.
Actually, one of the things I really like about your writing is that white supremacists frequently get punched in the face, and it's a very satisfying thing to read. Yeah. And I was wondering what it was that made you kind of choose to explore racism in your writing, and in a way that maybe a lot of other Australian crime fiction doesn't really kind of, it's a place we don't always go to. So kind of what made you decide to go there?
Well, I think I think good crime fiction can be entertaining, but also explore interesting things about the world we live in. And like many people, I guess over the last 5 or 10 years, I've become increasingly alarmed by the way things are heading. I don't even want to talk about the election today, but
We can't.
yeah. So I'm just watching this slow normalisation of dog whistling and racist sympathies, and I wanted to, I explored it with True West, my last novel,
Mm.
and I wanted to go back to a time when things were a little bit more open. Um, and so I've got Devon Smith, who is bringing his particular brand of American racism, which his father has learned in Californian prisons, into Australia. And in answer to your question, I also think, I mean, there's a bit of history with Australian crime fiction over the longer term being political.
Mm.
When mine and a few other crime writers' novels were reviewed in the German newspaper Der Spiegel, it mentioned that they were very political crime novels,
Okay.
which surprised me because, I read widely like everyone, I guess. But thinking about it, I guess that, there's some kind of truth to that. Again, you're looking at social issues, and this goes back to crime fiction written in Australia in the 19th century, which was a pretty strong kind of period. And yeah, so I suppose I'm drawing on a deeper tradition by doing it. At least that's what I'm trying to do.
um,
And you get to punch Nazis in the face.
Oh God, it's so good. I love to see a Nazi get punched. It's one of my favorite things about your books. No, there's a lot. So with Frank Swann himself, so you've got the 4 Frank Swann books, and then you've got things like True West, where it's kind of like tangentially within the Frank Swann world, I should say. And yeah, did you have a trajectory with your first book that you've kept to? Has it changed at all? And do you have a different one now?
Yeah. So when I wrote Line of Sight, I wrote it for a particular person. He was the youngest son of this brothel madam who was murdered by police in Western Australia in 1975. And I thought it was just going to be a one-off. It was, my first novel had kind of crimey elements. But I didn't know what I was going to write after that, to be honest. But part of the research for that story was because at the time I was doing my research, there was still so much fear and trepidation about this particular murder. I went out and spoke to dozens and dozens and dozens of people, and just trying to kind of triangulate stories, trying to work out the difference between truth and fiction and legend and mythologization and all those kinds of things. And when Line of Sight came out, I realised that there were just so many wonderful stories about Perth related to crime that hadn't been told, because it's pretty hard to write about these kinds of stories if you're a journalist or a historian, because you need things to be on the record. You need there to be evidence. You need to tell both sides of a story. So I thought I'll try and kind of write a series that captured some of these stories about that I think are significant. So the next one, Zero at the Bone, looks at the stock market scams that were going on, the beginning of heroin importation into Perth at a time when Perth was a transit point for heroin coming into Australia. Like I said, Old Scores looks at the WA Inc. period, which is a pretty rich vein of material for a crime writer. And True West was True West was a specific look at the sad strength of the neo-Nazi scene in Perth in the late 1980s. So,
did your research for this? Well, actually, yeah. So, did you research for this book in particular bring any like really interesting moments? Did you find anything particularly stunning when you were researching this book?
No, this one was a real joy to write. I mean, my favorite kind of research is going out and talking to people. In this case, the only people I talked to were people I'm a member of a pub in Fremantle called the Navy Club. And as you guess from the name, a lot of the people who drink in there are old kind of sailors from all walks of life and all ranks. So I went and asked a few stories, asked a few questions in there, and heard a few interesting stories. But most of the things that informed my desire to write the story, I had an idea of before I started, and they relate back to some experiences when I was a kid. Really, one when I was 18 or 19 years old, living in Mombasa in Kenya. And a lot of my friends at that time were working prostitutes. And I lived in a cheap hotel, and these were great bunch of people. And it was a port, so their main custom was sailors. And while it was quite entertaining listening to their stories of the different characteristics of the different nationalities of men who kind of came through, there's some very strange things to say about drunk Australians. But when I was living there, a US Navy ship came to port, and these women were quite excited by that because Americans are traditionally big spenders, but they're also quite nervous. And they told me that on previous visits, some serious assaults had happened, and allegedly a murder or two that was never investigated because the ship left straight away. I was only there for 2 or 3 days and then shot out. And I remember thinking then that really troubled me, because it seemed, that what a perfect cover for a sex offender or a sexual sadist or a murderer to be a member of a navy that just turns up in port, and then before there's any chance of being caught, you're already safely away and you may never return again. And then when I was working up in Japan as a bartender in Tokyo, and we used to work the midnight to dawn shift, and most of the customers at about 4 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning were American sailors and Marines who'd missed the last train home. So they just sit there drinking tequila, and I got to chat with them. It's pretty quiet in those hours. And so I got to hear some pretty good stories about life on board the aircraft carrier. And one of those guys basically jumped ship and started working in the bar, and we became quite good friends. And so he told me lots of stories about life on board the aircraft carrier, to do with racial politics, but also the way the black market worked. And I turned those two kind of experiences, the one in Mombasa and the one in Tokyo, into shore leave without having to do too much research in the present tense.
Did you get to go on an aircraft carrier at any point? Probably not.
No, I didn't. But I used to trade things with sailors, food and alcohol, basically. So, legs of lamb I used to get from Australian sailors. And anyway, that's whole different story.
Actually, one of the things I was wondering, so David and I were like Facebook and Twitter friends, and the stories that he suddenly just his picture from my past, and it's like got some amazing story attached to this picture, and you just think, I want to hear more about this. Do you think you've got more stories in your past that you can mine for future books or memoir?
Yeah, so I guess I go back. I've never turned anything that's happened in my life really into my fiction. And I don't know if I'd ever write memoir, because those things happened a long time ago and I'd never kept a diary or anything. So there's a few stamps in passports, but I'm very hazy about the actual dates when I was where. Okay. And that was a pretty hazy time all around. But yeah, people I've met and the stories they've told me, the things I've learned about the people I've met, I have turned those kinds of things into sometimes I've amalgamated characters, or I've taken a story and worked it in, just as I have here with Shore Leave. Mm-hmm. But no, maybe I'm hoping if I live to be a ripe old age, my memory, they say your long-term memory gets better. If that's the case, maybe I'd have a stab at it then. But at the moment, yeah, I don't think it would work.
I know that some of our listeners are kind of interested in the writing aspect as well. So how do you, your books are so sharp. Like, I really barreled through Shore Leave, and it was like kind of mid-lockdown, and I was feeling a bit like I actually found it very hard to read anything during lockdown. I couldn't really get into any books. I would pile them up. I would buy them because I was still working in my bookshop's warehouse. So I still had access to them. I'd bring them home and I would pick them up and I would just be like, actually, I can't invest my brain into this. I can't think this clearly. And then I picked this up and I got through it in like a day and a half. It was really just so exciting and just so interesting and so well written. How do you plot? Like, how do you get something like this? Do you just kind of go, or do you have index cards and like red string everywhere? Do you have a plan?
Yeah, no, I wish I was a planner, but no, I'm a total pantser. So I usually, with all of these stories, I start with my three characters, and I don't really know how they're going to meet one another or what their real relationship is. Um, because I'm quite busy outside of my writing life, I don't get big chunks of time to write. So I think the pacing is probably an aspect of having an hour, or an hour and a half, and I sit down and I'll write. So the chapter length's probably a reflection of that. I'll get to write a chapter in one person's voice, and then maybe the next day I'll have another hour, an hour and a half. That's usually how I do it, but it's also I guess, a reflection of the fact that I'm not a planner. I just start and I learn about my characters as I go along. I mean, often I just start with a name and just an image of a face, as was the case with these guys. And as I'm writing, I'm learning about them, and hopefully they're surprising me and saying interesting things and doing interesting things. And the plot just is really, the plot just develops out of those particular characters. And I usually have no idea what is going to happen next, which is quite exhilarating, quite anxiety producing too. It's not the ideal situation. So I do admire people who can make a plan and kind of stick to it. But yeah, the pacing and the the structures of the story too. It's a result of zipping around from A to B, in my life.
Yeah, how do you, as a father and somebody with a job at Curtin University, where do you fit writing in around all that?
Well, I'm lucky because I get one day a week as part of my job to write, or to do research, or all kinds of research. So that's fantastic. And also when everyone else is asleep. So I'm not really a morning person. I used to get up really early in the morning, but I find it difficult to do that now. But fortunately, everybody in my family is usually asleep by 10, and I'm a bit of a night owl. So that often means I get 2 or 3 hours of peace and quiet. Even the dog is asleep. So the house is just perfectly quiet. And so I start, I'm tired. It's the end of a long day. I don't really feel like writing. So I just kind of trick myself. I say I'll just do a bit of editing, and before you know it, one thing leads to another. So it's stealing time wherever I can.
Smart move. I like it. Regarding the writing as well, I've lost my train of thought. You're too distracting. You've got you say interesting things, then I'm like, I'm going to talk about this, and then you say something, and I've lost my train of thought because I'm too busy listening instead of doing my job. Do you think it's like a kind of collaborative process, do you find, with your writing? Do you bounce ideas off your editor or anything like that, or are you more, you save that for the end? Is it like teamwork for you, or is it quite a solo mission, so to speak?
It's quite a solo mission. I'm one of those superstitious type people, because I don't really know where a story is going or even what it's about. I find it very hard to talk about it while I'm doing it to anyone. What I said probably wouldn't make much sense, because often it's not until the final 5 or 6 chapters that I know where the story is really going. So yeah, it would just be a garbled mess if I did try and bounce ideas off someone. So it's pretty solo activity, but I'm lucky. Once I've written what is hopefully a polished first draft, I've got a really great editor at Fremantle Press, Georgia Richter, and yeah, so I find the editing writer relationship and process to be very informative. I mean, in the sense that I learn a lot about writing from that process as well, but also, something that's very conducive or very good for the end kind of product, where you get asked hard questions, or you get editing is done and suggestions are made, and then things can be teased out and developed a little bit further. I also have a couple of friends who are my first readers. So, but again, it doesn't happen until the first draft is done. So one friend of mine who is a big reader, and in fact, this book is dedicated to him. He's a camping buddy of mine who I met when I used to teach in the prison system here for Mark. I was going to add what's his rank in the Dancing Panda Regiment, but no, he wanted me to take that out. I lost my train of thought now. Yeah, so sorry. He's a font of knowledge on all things to do with weapons and cars and music. So I run things by him from that angle, and I have a couple of other friends who give me really good structural advice. That's flat in the middle. Andrew Nettie in Melbourne has been fantastic. True West was dedicated to him, and a number of other people who, they're people who, will tell me what I need to hear if something's not working. Which is
actually,
really yeah.
I find my very first reader has to be, I have a friend who will just tell me very reassuring things about how good it is, even if it's terrible. And I kind of just need that to be able to send it to the next editor, and they can tell me all the things that I need to fix. But just need that first person to say, oh, Fiona, it's a masterpiece. And I'm like, I am actually the best writer ever, aren't I? Oh, you're right. Okay, I can send this off now. It's fine. Just need that kind of constant reassurance to help me out. Do you find that writer's block is ever a problem for you? I've had people ask me how other writers can kind of deal with writer's block. Has that ever been something you've had a problem with?
Not really, but I have been asked about it by other writers. I think usually because I'm so time poor, I just when I'm there, I just have to be kind of present because I need to make the most of the little time that I've got. But the advice I usually give is about being there regularly as possible, so you train your brain, but also. For me, writing is a bit of a confidence trick I play on myself in terms of the first draft. Like when I wrote my first novel, it took me years and it was excruciating, and I basically had a nervous breakdown halfway through it. It was quite traumatic. And so ever since then, because I don't want to go back there, ever since then I just tell myself, I take the pressure off myself, and this is the advice I give. I just say, it's a first draft. If it's shit, it doesn't matter. No one really cares. You're going to be the only one reading it anyway. Don't put any pressure on yourself. Don't take it too seriously. And I find if I do that, that kind of doubting voice is dissipated. But of course, meanwhile, my brain, which does want to write well, is kind of takes over. So I'm aware that I'm tricking myself, but and I'm aware that I am taking it seriously. But I find that kind of reassuring that when I just say, look, it doesn't matter if I write 50,000 words and it goes in the bin, well, so be it. And I find somewhere the balance between those two things, I take a middle path.
So actually, speaking of giving advice, you are a teacher a professor at Curtin University. Do you ever ignore your own advice that you find you're giving other people about creative writing?
You've given me a pay rise there, calling me a professor.
Sorry. I didn't go to university. I'm not sure of the ranking. Just go with it.
I'll take it, even if it's fictional. Do I not follow my own advice? No, not specifically. Although I'm always aware when I'm teaching about the difference between talking about the tech, because the course I teach in is pretty technically based. It's very practical, which I find is good. What is different when I actually start sit down to write is the recognition that it's still such an instinctive process for me. I can know all of these things. I can teach all of these things, but once you've been doing it for a while, like I feel I have, so much of it does kind of become instinctive. And True West, the novel before this, was for me an exercise in writing instinctively. I really just wanted to write something quite quickly and see whether all of those things that I've learned over the years can happen purely without thinking about it, going back and editing and all of that. So there's that, but also, I also find the teaching process, strangely enough, I find the teaching process, talking about all of those technical aspects of writing, I get a lot out of it too, because I forget, as we all do, how important some of these things are. So I find myself, even while I'm talking, I was like, you didn't do that when you were writing that. You didn't do that when you're writing that yesterday, you know. Like, so I get a lot out of it, even as I'm doing the job.
Actually, speaking of being instinctive, that voice that you have is like, it's just such a really gripping kind of, it's really sharp, but also kind of laconic, amazing Australian voice. Do you find you have to work to write these, like, especially because there's three different voices, do you have to work hard to kind of make them separate, or does it feel like it comes quite naturally to you?
Yeah, I enjoy writing in that, in the kind of voice of the Frank Swann novels, but it does come naturally because it's the voices I hear around me. I guess it's probably the one closest to my lived life. I don't have to work. I mean, yeah. So the style has developed over the years. It's become more pared back, a little bit clearer or cleaner, I hope. But at the same time, sometimes I get a bit tired of that, and so every now and then I've written other things. So there's a creative nonfiction book about Perth, and a couple of years ago there was a novel called The Coves, which is set in San Francisco in 1849, and that's a really, both of those books allowed me to write more lyrically. So I enjoy, you know, the writing has to be about pleasure for me as well. So I do find it pleasurable writing a very spare or plain kind of story like the Swan ones. But there are also times when I just want to break out and discover as I'm writing, or extend myself a little bit in terms of, you know, a lyric voice. That's fun too. And the next novel coming out next year or the year after, again, is set in 1850s.
Okay.
It's about an escaped Australian-Irish convict, and it's written in this really, the whole book is written in, you know, mainly in his voice. And again, it's just totally unlike Frank Swann's voice, for example. So these are, I think of these as little holidays from the regular Australian lingo, which I also enjoy writing.
Speaking of nonfiction as well, because you do a lot of research on your books anyway, do you find, what's the biggest difference for you between writing nonfiction and writing fiction? Do you have like very separate kinds of plans for those, or with your Perth book especially?
Yeah, good question. I think the big difference is writing nonfiction is a lot harder. At least it is for me. I mean, I enjoy just making stuff up. I enjoy not knowing what's going to happen next. I enjoy being surprised in a narrative, and you can get that kind of surprise from writing creative nonfiction too. But I find, because I'm you know, you're making when you're writing nonfiction, you're making a contract with your reader that this stuff is factual or it's truthful. So yeah, reaching, it's much more chaotic too. When I'm writing fiction, it's just me and my laptop in a basically an empty room. When I'm writing nonfiction, it's a table piled with 20 or 30 books with, you know, stickets, and I'm reaching for a quote here and I'm reaching for a quote there, but you know, they're different kinds of pleasure. But I find writing nonfiction a lot harder, although it has given me a lot in terms of writing fiction, because the research I've done, the nonfiction research I've done into Perth and Western Australia's specific history, has given me a lot of great material, but also, you know, informed my sense of place, my sense of being, where I am, and all of that kind of finds its way into the fiction eventually anyway. So
do you ever find yourself surprised when you kind of lose yourself in your 70s and the 80s writing to go out into the Fremantle of today and see it look differently? Does that ever shock you that you've kind of you've built this world in your mind and you're like, oh no, that's not there anymore, or anything like that?
Yeah, it's changed, but maybe not as much as you might think. Yeah, the pubs have got different names. There are more houses. There's like in lots of other parts of Australia, there's been a lot of gentrification. But at the same time, I guess maybe it's an aspect of being a writer. I'm a chronic daydreamer anyway. So when I'm walking around Fremantle, I'm never really present entirely. I mean, I'm always looking, but I'm always daydreaming as well. And a large part of that daydreaming, and again, this is about pleasure, of walking around a place like Fremantle, which has such a fantastic history, and it's a city with so many great storytellers. As I'm walking down High Street of Fremantle, yeah, I'm looking at 2020 Fremantle, but I'm also thinking about, you know, it's a little bit weird or spooky, but I'm also seeing ghosts, you know, who may be fictional characters in other people's novels, or they may be historical figures. So I'm the past is always with me when I'm walking around a place like Fremantle. So I'm never really here in 2020 entirely.
That's a really great answer. I really like that one. Do you think that places themselves can kind of form what a crime book is going to be? Like, you know, Western Australia creates a different kind of crime book than Melbourne, for example.
Yeah, good question. I think in terms of writing crime novel, in crime novels set in an urban area, there are a lot of crimes that happen in Perth, which are, you know, the same crimes that happen everywhere. Armed robbery, etc. Theft, murder, all of those kinds of things could be happening anywhere. What I try and do when I'm writing about Perth is I'm really curious about this place, and I'm always trying to get at what goes on behind the surface. And crime fiction, of course, is a great medium for doing that, looking behind the masks that we wear as individuals, but also as societies. And Perth tells itself stories like every other city about what kind of place it is. And sometimes those things are true, and sometimes those things aren't. What I've tried to do in my crime fiction is look at some of the things that are specific to Perth. And one of those things is the huge number of shysters, or what was the you know, sharks in suits, con men, basically, who in other cities might be recognised for what they are, but in Perth they seem to do a pretty good trade, because Perth is this beautiful, bright place with, you know, nice clean light, and it's a very spread out city. There's not that kind of intensity of vision when people are walking around looking at everything. So a lot of these characters, they have tended to operate in plain sight, because nobody really expects the person living on the corner to be a con man ripping off millions and millions of dollars. So I like looking at those kind of characters, and that to me is an example of a crime that is an aspect of place, because it seems so perfectly matched to the sense of what Perth is as well. I mean, as a great West Australian writer, Dorothy Hewitt, said, you know, in Perth the worm in the bud is secretive. She was comparing Perth crime and corruption to Sydney, where it was all out on the surface. You walk through King's Cross in the 60s, everybody knew what was going on. And whereas you walk through, you know, Northbridge in Perth in the 1960s, and a lot of things were happening behind closed doors. You had to look a little bit deeper or a little bit harder to find exactly the same things were going on, of course, and often with the same people were involved. But you had to look a little bit harder. You had to be kind of in the know a little bit.
Actually, that makes me think as well, like with Frank Swann, he's kind of somebody who's in the margins of, like, he's ex-police, and kind of just kind of knows everybody. He's a man who kind of wants to help everybody, well, or doesn't want to help anybody. And it kind of, like, what makes you decide to write a book about somebody kind of on the margins of crime rather than like a straight police procedural?
So I like the genre. I like the kind of the hard-boiled or noir genre anyway. So where your characters are operating outside of law enforcement often, and this goes back to, you know, one of my favourite crime writers, the Sicilian Leonardo Sciascia. So he wrote about ordinary people put in dangerous circumstances by often it was just witnessing a crime. What does that mean for you if you've seen a mafia figure kill someone? You may not have wanted anything to do with it. You didn't want to see it. You don't want to know about it. But now suddenly you're kind of in danger. So I think I like that kind of style of storytelling, because for me it's psychologically interesting to have characters outside of institutions operating, trying to work things out. You know, so you're putting these characters who don't have any kind of institutional protection in positions of danger, and in doing so, you know, they're often forced to learn certain things about themselves, which to me is interesting because, you know, as I said before, I think crime fiction is a great medium for looking behind the surface of things, and it can be a matter of looking at individuals. I mean, we all tell ourselves stories about ourselves I'm a kind person, I'm a generous person, I'm a loyal person, I'm a brave person. It's not until we're put in extreme situations, or we're tested, or tempted, that we actually find out we're not that kind of person. Crime fiction's a great medium for doing that, particularly the genre I like writing in, because often the characters are ordinary kind of people. And then you just kind of transpose that, because as societies, we tell ourselves lies about ourselves too. Australians are this, Australians are that, Perth is this kind of place. And so it seems to me this style of novel is better able to look at those kinds of questions, the difference between who we think we are and who we really are, than a police procedural where you're part of an institution and you're following procedures.
Yeah, I really like it's an aspect of your books that I really enjoy actually as well. And one of the other things that I wanted to ask was I knew that I was going to lose my train of thought as soon as I started saying this sentence. Oh, that's right. So another really good thing about your really realistic characters, like they feel so real and genuine. And one of the things I really enjoyed about Shore Leave was that you gave your main character like an actual, I'm trying to think of a way that doesn't say too much about the book, but basically the effects of being a crime book protagonist have caught up with him in this book. What made you decide to kind of really talk about that? Because, you know, and a lot of the times you get authors writing 20 book series, and like, I mean, I'm not saying that they're ignoring this kind of thing, but like surely the like 20 massive book worthy adventures in a row must take it out of you. And in this one, you've made it like really visceral, how you can be affected by, you know, being a crime book protagonist. What made you decide to do that?
Part of it was the fact that when Old Scores finished, Frank Swann was quite injured by his experiences there. So partly it was a reflection of that, this idea of lingering ailment or a mystery kind of illness. That was the kind of main one, but also. I mean, I remember, you know, Ian Rankin talking about his Rebus character and how he wished he'd started him as a younger man, because having written, I don't know how many he's written now, 10 or 20, if he kept on at the same trajectory, he'd be writing, you know, Rebus would be an 80-year-old.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit that with Frank Swann as well. You know, he's getting into his late 40s, I think. He has suffered a lot. I mean, I think like a lot of crime fiction main characters, he's seen too much of the world, like policemen and women in real life. You know, he's seen the worst of people quite often. He has he's charted his own course towards living a good life. He wants to live a quiet life, but yeah, he has suffered a little bit, and I wanted to, rather than the kind of danger or threat to his mortality that he has found himself in when he's found himself in dangerous situations, I wanted to bring in a different kind of sense of mortality, and that is he's got an illness, maybe a life-threatening illness. He's not quite sure at the beginning of the story, and what would that mean for him in terms of his relationships with his trade as a PI or citizen investigator, and what would that mean for his relationships with his family too.
We're getting towards the part where I'm going to start opening up the floor for some questions. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to type it in the comments below, and I can put them to David and see what to say. And again, a link to buy the book if you'd like to buy it. Helps if I hold it the right way around. I'm just going to sidetrack a little bit now and ask one question. It's a bit more relevant to me, I guess, but I'm just curious all the same. Is that did you find that COVID affected your writing in any different type of way? I know that your experience over there in Western Australia kind of dampened it early is a lot different than mine, who, you know, here in, well, no longer in lockdown, well, not as much in lockdown. Did you find that there were any differences for you?
Yeah, good one. Good. Yeah. And it's something I've talked about a lot with, you know, whiskey Skype conversations with friends all around the world. It kind of has, despite the fact as you point out, you know, West Australia's had really a dream run in the context of what's been going on everywhere else in the world. You know, who would have thought something that so many people have complained about over the years, our so-called isolation would actually work in our favour for once, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's something. There's I'm sure people will be writing doctorates about it down the track, but there's been something about this year. It hasn't been a super productive year for me. There's this kind of ambient malaise that I mean, I'm still writing, but I'm finding it harder to focus, I think. And this is something a lot of writers have said, despite having sometimes perfect conditions, more time, more space. There's no real reason for that. Like I say, we've been incredibly fortunate over here in the West, and I have in my personal circumstances too. Our shutdown was pretty brief. The kids were great. I was still able to, come out to the shed and work. But yeah, it's been a strange year. I'll reflect on it down the track.
Yeah, it might be a bit too soon, really, isn't it, to really figure out how it's all affected us. But you're right, it's just kind of like a big all over thing. It's hard to shake, what's happening. And I feel like the forced isolation, like, the idea of me being at home more, that it should be easier to read. And, everyone had these big ideas for reading 100 books during lockdown. Instead, you just go, I can't focus anymore. It's just gone. Another thing I'd like to know is what crime books have you really found yourself kind of inspired by? Was there any writers that you really took like a lot from their writing, or you just enjoyed it, or you hated it so much that you were like, I can do better?
Recently, or
anytime you'd like to talk about.
So Leonardo Sciascia was a good kind of early influence. I really like an American writer that Andrew Nettie recommended to me, Megan Abbott. I loved her work. I love the way she went back to and looked at the hardboiled genre of setting novels in the 1940s, 1950s, but from a woman's perspective. That was kind of fascinating, and her voice and the quality of her writing was quite inspirational, and many others. The interesting thing though, the last couple of years though, is that I find myself reading fewer and fewer novels. I mean, for a while there, I was, 10 years ago, I was mainly reading American crime novels. But the last 5 years, I'm mainly reading Australian crime novels, which is a fantastic thing. I mean, there's so many good writers out there, even to just kind of get an idea of what other people are doing, or their friends' novels. I'm almost exclusively reading Australian novels at the moment. At the moment, I'm reading, it's not a crime novel so much, Jock Sarong's The Burning Island, which I'm greatly enjoying, because I really loved the Preservation, the one that came before. But yeah, lots of reading, but I'm mainly reading nonfiction at the moment. It's a discussion for a different time. But yeah, I'm working vaguely on a nonfiction book about marine piracy. So I'm doing a lot of nonfiction.
You can't really tell, but I'm wearing a ship badge to be like themed for the afternoon. I find Australian crime is really strong at the moment as well. Like I read a lot of different types of crime for my column that I have to write, so I kind of get sent a lot of books, and just Australian crime fiction. They're just it's really, really good. I'm actually finding that, I'm not trying to make it a dig or anything, but British crime is kind of getting a little bit samey, and so I find that if I read too much of it, I just feel like they all sound the same as each other. I'm not getting a lot of difference. But when you read Australian crime, there's so many different ideas and in different locations, and just different, just different ideas. I think like different, going at it from different directions, and it's just really good. And it's Australian crime, it's the best. What can I say? All right, so I've got a couple of questions here. I'm going to float to you now, David. Okay, so we've got Georgia here who says, when did you first think of yourself as a writer? Oh, have you frozen or have I frozen? I'm just going to keep talking for a second. I'm not quite sure. I'll see if I can get a message through from our lead people to see what's going on right now. Hang on a second. Oh, David's frozen. Okay, he's gone for a second. I'm just going to talk for a little bit as well. So yes, there's a couple of other good questions here that I'm really looking forward to. I hope a few of you can maybe think of a couple more ones. We'll get David on as soon as we can. I hope you've read some of his other books as well. I read his previous book, True West, as well. And it was just he's just really so good at getting those really punchy books out there. You really like relatable, but really super flawed characters that I really enjoy reading about. And yeah, his writing style is just incredible. I didn't mean to turn this into let's just rave about David, but he really is quite a good writer. And it's a lot of fun talking to him. It's a bit hard when he's not here. So if anyone's got any other questions, feel free to shoot them through as well. In the meantime, I'm wondering if I should maybe read a little bit more from his book, or maybe that would be a bit weird because I'm not the author. Maybe I will read a little bit of the praise for the Frank Swann series. The Crime Factory says it's hard-boiled and riveting writing, a notable addition to Australia's crime writing canon. The West Australian says, like Peter Temple, Whish-Wilson tells a cracker of a yarn while wielding language the way Sachin Tendulkar wielded a bat. The Australian says, fast-paced, complex, and with some excellent twists. This is quality crime. And Australian Book Review says, classic crime noir. There's a lot more in there. So yes, hopefully we can get him on again soon. Fremantle Press is working hard on getting him back on board. Okay, I've got a question for me as well. Thanks for that player. He says, which books do I recommend from the crime genre? I'm a big fan. Actually, I did really love Jock Sarong. Speaking of him, his first book, I can't believe I've forgotten the name of it. It's one word. And it's set on the, it's set kind of down Port Fairy area. And I really enjoyed that. I was a judge in the Ned Kelly Awards during the year that he won the Ned Kelly Award for that book. And it's just really, really powerful one. I really love that. I quite like Emma Viskich. Her Resurrection Bay series has been one that I've really enjoyed. I really like the way that she's kind of found a different type of character in that, so there's just kind of definitely not enough characters with disabilities represented in fiction. And for her, she found a character, she made a character who was deaf. And so he's wearing a cochlear implant, and when where he wears hearing aids, and when he's not wearing his hearing aids, he can't hear what's going on. And people were talking at him, he just can't understand it. And it kind of creates a really different and interesting type of perspective and a different type of story. And I really appreciate reading something like that because we just need as many different types of voices, I think, in crime fiction especially. So I really like her books as well. I'm actually surrounded, you can't quite see, but off screen here, I have these two big towering piles of crime books that I'm about to read or I have read. I'm looking at them here as well because sometimes without them right in my face, I can't quite remember. There is the new Kerry Greenwood book, The Death in Dalesford, which I read the first few chapters of. And I really had a great time with that one as well. I don't know if you've read any of her other Franny Fisher books, but she's got a new one out and it's just as kind of sassy and saucy and full of shenanigans as her other books. And that's, it was a good mood to read that and that was quite enjoyable. Seeing what else I can find here in my book. I actually read a really interesting American book that was based by Stuart Turton called The Devil in the Dark Water. I actually based that book on a trip he made, I think, to Australia, and he heard about the Batavia, the wreck of the Batavia, and so he wrote a book about the wreck of a ship that sails from Indonesia. I can't remember what it was called suddenly to it is Batavia, isn't it? To Amsterdam, and all these people go on the ship, and then it turns out that there's like a curse basically on the ship, or everybody thinks that there's a curse, and these two people have to try and figure out what's going on. And one of them is a noble woman whose husband is leading the ship and he's a jerk, and someone else is a soldier, and they team up to try and figure out. And it was a massive, thick book, and it was another one that in lockdown I was really surprised to enjoy after kind of not expecting to read anything so huge. I thought, I'll just read the first chapter and I'll stop. But I really barreled through that one as well. So that's called The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. That was another really good one. And another really unexpected one is by Ellie Marnie. She's a regional Victorian writer, and she wrote a book called None Shall Sleep, which is pitched as a young adult crime book. I would say it's definitely older young adults crime book. The characters in it are, I think, 18 and 19. And it's quite brutal. So I wouldn't be giving this to your kind of younger teenagers who are going, I'm interested in a crime book. Would heartily recommend it to adults. Her books are really, really great as well. She's got an amazing voice, and she can really tap into David's flashing back onto the screen for a second. So I've lost my train of thought again. Hello. Anyway, so Ellie's None Shall Sleep is another one to recommend. That's okay. I'll go back. I was just talking about some crime recommendations I had, and I'll go back to asking you some questions. Now, Georgia says, when did you first think of yourself as a writer?
I used to write stories when I was quite young, maybe around 11 years old. I used to take writing quite seriously, and then the teenage years hit and I lost all interest. And then when I was in my late teens and 20s, I started traveling around overseas, and I did a lot. There wasn't much to do in those days. It was pre-internet. So I used to spend a lot of time reading, and I guess at a certain point I started thinking that, well, I could do it as well. So then I just started writing short stories, some pretty bad, of course. But I still didn't, even after I'd started publishing stories, I still didn't really think of myself as a writer. Yeah, just it took a long time, I guess. I always was interested in reading. I was thought of myself more as a reader than a writer, I guess. I think probably not until I was in my early 30s when I really became fixated upon it, I guess. I wanted to do it more and more. Prior to that, it had been something I did for fun in the margins of my life. It wasn't until I started writing long form fiction that I realized how obsessive writing could become. Because short stories, you can be in a story and then be out of it quite quickly. But with a novel and getting to know a character, it takes a lot of dedication and a lot of mental space. And that's when I started to take writing seriously, I guess.
Okay. Now we also have a question from Chloe who says, do you have an ending for Frank Swann already planned? I think we're all very interested in this answer.
No, I'm too sentimental. I can't even go there. I guess there has to be a natural kind of end, but each time I think it's probably the last one, when I go away and work on something else, there he kind of is in the back of my mind, and I probably made the mistake of having him live in my house with his family too. At first it was a matter of convenience because I didn't have to look far to describe things, because his backyard is my backyard, his dog is my dog, and now that's going to make it very difficult to create some kind of divorce between my family and his family. So yeah,
the house will never burn down in the books, will it?
Oh God, I hope not. That's right. Yeah. So no ending as yet, but I guess maybe one day. I can't see myself killing him off.
Patricia says, having been the friend reading a first draft for an author friend a couple of times, I found it didn't enhance the friendship when I gave what I thought was a fairly gentle but honest opinion. Do you think your first draft reader friends are always willing?
To give an honest opinion? I think so. If particularly my writer friends, they know what kind of feedback is useful and what kind of feedback isn't. So yeah, I think so. I mean, I can, with a couple of my other friends, my friend who I go to for music and weapons and car advice, I have to kind of read between the lines a little bit, so I can kind of tell if he's like, he's not entirely enthusiastic. Then I have to dig it. I have to ask, and it's always over a pint. I have to maybe buy him another pint and then ask him a few more pointed questions and let him think about it for a while. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard when you're giving advice to a friend about their story. It's not an easy thing to do, but I like many writers, I suspect I have an ideal reader when I write, someone who I don't actually show the story to anymore, but her advice to me when I was a younger writer was so pointed and good and sometimes brutally honest. I often find myself thinking, what would she think of this passage? What would she think of this kind of structure? So I find that quite useful too.
I actually, I think it's important to kind of, I know you're not asking me, Patricia, sorry, but I'm answering anyway, but like to set up the boundaries of what you actually want to hear first, I think can be a really good thing. Because like I said, I have this friend and I'm like, all I want to hear from her is that it's great, but I do have other friends who read it and they will tell me what is wrong, because I do need to hear it. Nothing is perfect, especially the first time round, and you need some good advice. But yeah, it is hard. My partner, actually, I hate it when he reads my books. I can't take any criticism from him at all. So I have to make sure he does it nice compliment sandwiches. So he tells me, everything's amazing, the characters are good, you need to fix his entire plot line. But geez, I love the ending. That was great. What a wonderful font, that kind of thing. I have to hear a lot of really encouraging things just from him. Other friends like they can just rag on it. I don't mind at all. And Patricia, we've got one from Claire as well, who says, do you read crime novels while you write them, or do you have to keep your reading and writing separate?
No, I usually read at the same time. When I was a younger and more impressionable writer, I found I had to be careful about what I was reading while I was writing. I found that sometimes a voice could slip over into my own. I find that less and less to be the case. So which is good, because I can, I'll be reading a couple of crime novels on the go. I'll be reading a bit of nonfiction. I have to read a lot of student work. I read academic articles, and I find that's all fine. But yeah, I enjoy reading crime novels while I'm writing crime novels.
Yeah, I too find that, that's writing, that voice seeping in. I think I'm still stuck at that point in the moment. Sometimes I read things and I'm like, this is too similar to what I'm going for, so I actually can't read this right now. I'm afraid of it taking over, stealing quotes and stuff like that. And Patricia also says, do you give advice to other author friends?
Yes, occasionally. And again, yeah, going back to what I just said, it's tricky, but these are friends who also give me the same kind of advice. So yeah, I just try and be gentle. But if there's something that's not working, it's in the best interests of the story and my friend who is trying to get the story published. If I think the advice is honest, of course they may not take the advice on, but yeah, it's about how you say it, I guess. But in the long run, yeah, you want the story. They're a friend, right? So you want the story to be as good as it possibly can be. And
well, that kind. Oh, okay. So, and then the last one was, okay, this is good, because this is what I was about to say next, is that before the Facebook Live wraps up, we need to know what was the truth in your 3 truths and 1 lie video. Who won? And tell us what the truth and lie was.
Okay, so from memory, the truths were there was a break-in in Northbridge a couple of years ago, and the thief stole a bottle of champagne and a copy of Old Scores, which I thought was quite a funny story when I heard it. That's a true story. The other truth was, yes, as a result of writing my crime novel set in Perth, some people have threatened me, said, they've seen themselves in the story, or they've told me not to write about certain things. The other truth was, I think I just gave it away a couple of minutes ago, that yes, I do live in the same house as Frank Swann with his family. That's a true story. But the lie was that Frank is a version of myself, because he's not really. When I wrote the first Frank Swann novel, Line of Sight, I had a couple of people in mind, and they were older ex-detective types, and these were men I respected because they were whistleblowers. And to be a police whistleblower in Perth in the 1970s, you had to be a crazy, brave kind of person. So when I thought about Frank Swann's deeper morality and the way he operated in the world, I often thought about these guys and what they had been through. So he started off as that kind of character. So he's not really like me.
Excellent. And the winner of that one is Carol Mills.
Yes.
Congratulations, Carol. Who wins the crime pack? Sorry.
Yes, no, that's right. Yeah, well done.
And who wins a crime pack, which you will find in the comments below there. There'll be a little bit more information about that as well. And yes, so congratulations to Carol, and just a big reminder that you can buy a copy of Shore Leave from the link below, or from your friendly neighbourhood bookshop as well. And also don't forget to join Shot in the Dark next time, which is with Alan Carter and Fiona Stader of Avid Reader. That's going to be on Wednesday, the 9th of December at 5 p.m. Perth time and 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The pair will be in a conversation about Doom Creek, where much-loved protagonist Nick Chester investigates a cold case murder and a scandal scandal. I'm reading off. I'm sorry, I forgot. I haven't managed to get my hands on a copy of this one yet, but I do love Alan Carter's books. And a scandal-plagued religious sect, and you can also find a link for that in the comments as well. And yes, once again, please feel free to buy a copy of this, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really great talking to you, David. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fiona. Brilliant.
Excellent. No worries. See you later, everyone.
See ya.